Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Karl Forehand, and it's just the two of us today. So, no guests. What do we got going on?
Well, we're filling a hole in the schedule here. It's been open. If we were to do a new podcast today, if we found a new guest and recorded it today, it would be broadcast in late October because they're all stacked up. I think I have 10 or 11 in the queue right now that have scheduled times to come out. And this is July 28th. This slot is due tomorrow.
Yeah.
We've put it off long enough. And it's not a subject, or we didn't really have a subject before we did it, just a spot. But I wanted to talk about our book, Leaning Forward, that's going to be released in a couple of weeks, right?
Sure.
August 15th, which is about maybe 2.5 weeks from now. So we wanted to talk about it a little bit, give people maybe a little more insight into it.
Okay.
So, Leaning Forward is in many ways a continuation of Out into the Desert. We wrote Out in the Desert in 2020 is when we started writing it. So it's getting to be later 2023. And so during that time there was the book started as something else. And then, over time, throughout the last couple of years, it's kind of morphed into something different. But what it is, it's 4 sections. And let's talk about that a little bit. You up for that?
Sure thing.
We were saying yesterday that we almost, sometimes you almost forget what you wrote.
I do forget what I wrote.
Yeah.
I do. I think because, when I write, I'm, in the moment. And, I know when we wrote Out into the Desert, it was like you were reading it back to me. Like, we tell this part of our story a lot, back and forth to Kansas City when you were going through your stroke recovery. But it was like, as you were reading it to me, I was like, wow, I wrote that?
Damn,
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think really, I'm just kind of, I get tunnel vision, and I'm like, okay, this is my objective. I need to write this chapter, because you write multiple chapters in a day. I write 1 chapter a day, hopefully, sometimes a chapter a week. I'm very, very slow in the whole process, but so that's why I can't remember what I wrote, I think, because I'm just so focused. But anyway, so I'll do my best to try to remember what I said.
Yeah, and one thing about it, this is the second book that we've published by ourselves, designing the cover and everything else about it.
Of our books.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, the first one is your novel, so I didn't help write that. But I know you always give me credit. As a collective,
as the Desert Sanctuary.
Gotcha.
As the worldwide corporation of the Desert Sanctuary goes, we've published a couple this year, and it's been a little bit challenging, but more than anything, just sense of accomplishment. To get that done. I was really happy that last year during my stroke recovery, we got to publish The Hotel and Out in the Desert, which has been our best-selling book ever. Ever in the 7 years.
That's all right.
But that that was fulfilling. That got something done, quote unquote, during my recovery. and it was helpful for me. And you mentioned it's also healing for both of us. But then now we've published. This is the second book we've published, and the first, like you said, the first of our efforts together. So it's exciting.
Yeah.
And we've been what we've been doing is talking to a lot of magnificent people. I think it's. I just want to mention this. Is that all right?
I don't know what you're going to say,
I know.
so that's typically... You asked my permission, I have no idea what you're going to say. Anyway, go ahead. I guess you have my permission.
I think we talk about community, and even in the desert we have community. And sometimes you grow at different paces, and you address things. And so even, in the desert, which we're for and we're promoting, this evolution, this moving on, but sometimes you evolve at different rates of people, and you're at different places, and so even friends that we've made out here in the desert are not. I think sometimes I worry personally. Oh well, that didn't work out so well, and I don't know if you're like this, but sometimes I blame that on myself or. Say, what could I have done better, But really, it's just that sometimes you just have to move on from a relationship or a group because it's not right for you.
Right.
And I think one thing that helped me in the last few days with that is when we talked to Paula Stone Williams, and she quoted from a poem called Sweet Darkness. The very last line, talks about growing, when people are too small, maybe it's time to move on.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think I battled with that sense of, it's me. Probably more so when we were in ministry than I do now. Probably also at the beginning of our deconstruction. And maybe part of that too is unhealthy in a way, because I am very, what's the word? Reluctant, I guess, to form super deep connections. We heard a lot of that when we were in ministry, or I did. The women, especially of the church, kind of latched onto me, and after 6 hours of knowing me, I was their best friend.
Love bombs,
right? Yeah. And so I think I'm just very. I don't trust people that just love bomb you, or. And I'm not saying that that's what has happened with all our relationships here in the desert, but I don't know. I just, it's weird because the relationships that mean the most to me are our relationship, the relationship with my kids and my grandkids, and then my sisters. And the rest of it is kind of gravy. That's not saying that it doesn't hurt when something hurtful happens. It does, but I'm less likely to blame myself for that. It's not that I don't do some reflection and things like that. I think that's very important to do, and I don't think everything's completely one-sided, so it's all their fault and nothing's my fault. But instead I might say, well, I probably loosen the boundaries there a little too much, and that's why maybe I got hurt. I don't know. Anyway, it's a process, but I can definitely relate to that. I was more that way probably in our ministry and at the beginning of our deconstruction than I am now. And for good or bad, and part of me thinks this is kind of bad. But, it's easy for me to, like you say all the time, it's easy for me to break up with people. I think that's just because, like I said, there's very few relationships in my life now that I want to, that I'm going to, hang on to.
Yeah. So it was in the church where we had to hang on to those relationships. And we were walking wounded and we were hurting each other. Mm-hmm. But we were kind of confined to that. Now we move out in the desert. But those many people that have evolved, that are moving on, are still wounded. Mm-hmm. And most of them, what I noticed, most of them are trying to do self-care and trying to help themselves. But it doesn't excuse the fact that they're still wounded. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, it's just the best you can do is set some boundaries and continue with where you're going, and then when like what's happened to us in the last few weeks is that new people have come into our life that are outstanding, and but we don't want to approach that like with fear. We want to be brave and authentic as we go into those relationships, but
I also don't think you can go, okay, now this is our new group.
Right, exactly.
Right. I mean, I think we're honored to have met the people that we've met over the last, I would say, month. But like, it's not, well, forget those other people, Right. I mean, we do wish people well, even people that have hurt us. I do think that's a testimony to the growth that we're trying to, the internal growth that we're trying to do, where we can say, okay, well, we're not, part of this group or whatever. We're not, we're not as close to these people as we once were. And now we're gravitating toward, this other group of people, but not like sticking our flag in there and saying, okay, we have arrived. I mean, I think you have to hold on to those things loosely, which is weird because as so many people have shared with us, connection, like we're hardwired for that. Like we want that connection. And when that connection's broken, it is painful.
Yeah. So when we went to Texas, 5 people contacted us and said, let's go to lunch. And so for 5 days in a row, we went to lunch with people and realized we have a friendship with some of those people, and now it's even stronger.
Yeah.
But like you say, we have to be able to treasure that without worshiping it.
Yeah.
It's like I'm grateful for this relationship we have now. It might not last forever, but we try to treasure that as much as we can without, creating, I don't want to say codependency.
I was going to say codependency.
But, I mean, a certain amount, of loving and sharing time with people is, I have a certain amount of expectation on that. And I think maybe fine-tuning that and setting boundaries and things like that would go better in the future. But anyway,
I agree.
We're learning, we're growing, hopefully.
I just feel like it's a lifelong process. I don't think any of these things are things that you're just gonna, okay, I've arrived. I feel like that's the beauty of it, I guess. The beauty of deconstruction, or whatever you want to call it, is that you can continue to evolve and to grow, rather than, inside religion, a lot of times we dig our heels in and say, this is where I'm staying, even when we have questions or we don't agree or whatever. So.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the book a little bit. The book is called Leaning Forward. And first I wanted to explain what leaning forward means to me. We've been doing Leaning Forward conferences for a couple of years, basically inviting our friends to say, what do you see in the future, and so on. But leaning forward comes from my childhood, when the parents used to turn you out. So much so that there was a thing on TV that said, it's 11 o'clock, do you know where your children are? That was
right.
They would just let us go, let us run and play, and especially in the summer. Mm-hmm. So we would walk down this drainage ditch that was pretty dry and follow that wherever it went. And it ended up being at a playground for an elementary school. And so we played on the equipment. There's a thing called a geodome that you could hang from and climb all over. But if you're really brave, you could stand on top of it. And so we would stand on top of that, and then you'd see, hey, what's that out there in the pasture behind this school? And it would be like an old tractor or something. And so we'd have to go investigate that. And when we got to that point, then we could, quote unquote, lean forward and look out at the horizon to see what's next. And we'd notice a grove of trees, and so let's go see what that is. And in there we'd find a swimming hole that was nasty and probably wouldn't go in it today. I remember our kids, kind of bathing or being in a cattle pond with leeches and gross stuff in it. And so those are the kind of adventures we went on. And one day we'd find a creek, however you say that, with crawdads in it, and we'd decide, well, we're going to sell these, and then they'd all die on the way to the bait shop. But it was just, kind of consistently leaning forward. And that's what we did as kids. We'd lean forward and see what's next. What's that out there? What's next? And that's kind of the attitude that I hope we can structure our evolution or deconstruction journey, whatever you want to call that. It's different for everybody. But can we learn to lean forward? And so let's talk about those sections of the book. So there's 4 sections to the book. The first one is stories, and I think I called it Stories from the Desert, right?
I think that's right.
So Stories from the Desert, and it starts out with me talking for quite a while. First of all, about listening, how important listening is. You and the 280 interviews we've done and things like that have taught me to listen better. I'm still working on it. But the power of listening, but then also the common themes and kind of a look at the future. What are the common themes that we keep hearing on our podcast? As we would interview guests, one thing is the guests would say something several times. And I knew when they say it several times, it really means something to them.
Yeah.
Recent guest had this poem, and she went back to the poem several times. So I know it's important to her, especially if a certain phrase in there is repeated several times. Well, then when we take all of our guests together and say, what are the things that not only this person said it, but someone else said it, and someone else said it. And so just because a lot of people say it doesn't make it true. But then also we're developing our intuition as well as we go. And those things start to come together, and you see common themes like going within and trusting yourself and all of those kind of things, having agency for ourselves and advocacy for others. And so the presence and authenticity, all those things. It's just common themes that we've noticed with people that are doing well, quote unquote, out in the desert. So, and then you wrote the response to all of that called The Pastor's Wife.
I did?
And
where is that?
That is on page 27.
Okay, sorry. But because it goes into the future.
Yeah.
Like that first part is all you. Like where you're talking about the common themes.
Yeah.
That's all you. Okay, so then I come into the book on page 27. Gotcha.
So that's where you begin to kind of respond to some of the things I said, but also then your opinion as a pastor's wife, how it was different in some ways for you. So
yeah, I mean, I start off by saying that I've always considered myself a good listener, but and I think that's true. But I do think in ministry, there were only so many things I could say, even if people were coming to me with genuine hurts, there were only so many things I could say, because I kind of had to stay in line with, the teachings of our denomination or whatever. But for sure, out in the desert and listening to, all the stories that we've heard, some common themes are like that people have been hurt, and we hear their heart, and we hear about how they're healing, and the hope that they have. And those are the things that I can really work with, especially now that I don't have to align with any one particular doctrine.
Since I was a pastor in the previous life, I like it when you alliterate things. Start with the same letter. It's like preaching, and I see you doing that. It's pretty cool. I like it when you do that. So healing, heart, hope, all
hurts. We've heard all lot of people, how a lot of people have been hurt. Yeah. But I think the exciting thing, because I wrote that first. First we hear about the hurts. How has organized religion hurt people, and then in hearing about their hurts, we hear their heart. Hopefully, authentically, I hope they feel like we're a trusted space where they can really share their heart with us. And then, a lot of times we talk about what has helped them heal and what their hope is, for the future, whether that's inside or outside of organized religion. Because we do interview some people that are still inside organized religion. Mm-hmm. So, we've said this so many times, and we said this at our Wild Goose presentation, we're not trying to talk people out of going to church, but we're just trying to help them take an honest evaluation.
Yeah. Step back and look at it. Look at the water you've been swimming in, and get some vantage point on that, and do an honest evaluation. Don't fake yourself out. But we also understand that many of our friends still are in organized religion, trying to make something change from the inside, which is very, very difficult. Right. But we respect them for that. We don't want to stop saying what we're saying and saying what we think is true from the outside, but everybody has the right to make their own decisions and to do what's best for them. We're just talking about where we think we're going, try to tell our story.
Yeah.
So that first part was not a part of the original design, but we realized that what we've been doing over the past few years has affected us pretty deeply. And so we wanted to share that with you. And then the wrestling with beliefs section is second. And I start off in that by telling my religion story in more detail than I ever have, I think, just because I wanted...
Yeah, it's a lot of pages.
Yeah, it is.
I'm looking through it. It's a lot of pages.
Yeah, and it was because when I wrote the first book, Apparent Faith, what we were talking about in that book was how is God like a father? If God's like a father, isn't he supposed to be better than me? And so we used that lens to look at a lot of beliefs, like nationalism and hell and all those things. So in this book, we didn't want to rehash all of those, old discussions about hell and penal substitutionary atonement and all the things that most people who are deconstructing have already dealt with. And kind of brought up some new areas and a new kind of lens to look through, and that lens is of God. So you'll hear that throughout the book somewhat. And being of God is kind of my response to when people would say, well, we're all God, and I understand why they say that, but it just didn't quite fit right for us, I needed a different lens to look through. That lens was, well, if God is in every molecule, if God is, there's some, quantum physics and all that kind of thing. If all of that is, there's something intelligent, there's communication, there's connection, there's all kinds of things. How trees can communicate with each other, and mushrooms can have all kinds of communicate. So there's something in everything that would be more of my view of God any more than an anthropomorphic being somewhere up in the sky. So that section is all kind of in that light. And then when I opened that up, then we started talking about things like worship. Well, should we worship God? Does God need worship? Wouldn't that make him, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of narcissistic. Yeah. Narcissistic if he demands worship. I want my children to, again, back to the Father, but I want my children to respect me, but I don't think there's even a human dad that would be comfortable with, I need you to worship me.
Well, unless they're abusive.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, abusive
right.
parents would be that way, for sure. So,
not to say that everybody has to adopt this view, because these are views I'm still wrestling with, right? The next one was mercy and compassion. Is mercy okay? Is that a good word? Because mercy means that God is retributive. If I need his mercy, it's like a bug, begging, don't squish me. Have mercy on me. Well, that's if we're moving away from retributive God into restorative God, then how can you still say, God, have mercy on me, a sinner? It's that I'm a worm. It's the bug, the worm theology and things like that.
I think it's so interesting that how different I think we are, because you still wrestle with a lot of these things and make it part of, your writing is kind of like you wrestling out loud. And me, I'm just like, I just think so, like I'm tired of doing the mental gymnastics to, make God something he, she, it, they are or are not, and trying to justify the inconsistencies. So to me, it's like, I don't even want to think about it.
It's not fun for you.
It's just not. No, it's just a lot of mental gymnastics, and I don't know that I want to spend my energy there, but I also can respect what you're doing in spending your energy there. I mean, it's meaningful to you, but I think that's the beauty of this book, is that our perspectives aren't necessarily going to line up. And that's okay.
Right.
Like, there's room for that in what we call the desert. I feel like there's room for all of it. So
one of the sections was on prayer. Prayer, and then the Word of God after that, the Bible, and so on. So those are key, pivotal issues, And my approach.
Well, I don't know. Like, I feel like your perspective of some of those things has changed, not necessarily to equal mine, but I do think, and I think that's a good thing about wrestling with those things is, what is your truth today versus what you thought about it 6 months ago or whatever. And people might think that's kind of being wishy-washy, but it's really not, because you're actually doing some critical thinking. Yeah. And that's what's important, is that you start thinking critically instead of just going, well, this is what I've always been told all my life, so that's what I'm going to believe and never question.
Yeah, and so with an issue like the Bible, that was so important to me for so many years. Right. And I would even go to the pulpit and say, There's nothing of value I have to say except what's in this book.
Yeah, and you would also say, like, if you don't have your Bible with you today, I'm going to assume you have it memorized. And I would, like, sit in the pews and just cringe because I thought, that's so shaming. But I didn't, like, have the vocabulary for that. But I just remember feeling like, but we do stuff like that, right? When we're entrenched in religious dogma and what our denomination is expecting of not only the pastor and his family, but people that walk through the doors of the church. And my thing is, you know, maybe somebody doesn't have a Bible but anyway, I just thought that was interesting. It's amazing what we say, you know, in different phases of our you know, our religious.
Yeah. So sometimes it's hard for me to remember how dogmatic I was about.
And yet I didn't think you were like as dogmatic as some.
Right.
You know, I mean, I felt like you preached with a lot of love and grace and mercy and all the things that we're now kind of looking at. But yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
But I was still bound by what I knew and what I understood and what was expected and those kind of things. We went into like God's plan for us, kind of that phrase, and wrestled around with that. Does God have a plan for us, and why? Usually we don't know it, and usually it ends up being the plan that the pastor and the church had for us, because we can't ever find that plan that he had for us in particular.
And it's so, like, it just, like, brings me anxiety to even think about, because, you know, so many times and so many people, including myself, you know, you pray for understanding and you pray for wisdom, and it doesn't come because you're, like, looking outside yourself for that. And, you know, and then I think, why would a loving God keep that from you? Why is it like, well, I got a plan for you, but, you know, even as a teacher, like, I might go, we got something fun planned at the end of the day, and the kids are like, what is it? And I'm like, you'll find out. But, like, they find out by the end of the day. Like, you know, so God's basically up there, you know, in this scenario going, I got plans for you. Right. You know, I don't know when or if I'm going to tell you, but I got plans for you. See if you can figure it out.
Yeah, and when you don't figure it out, then you get morphed into the pastor's plan.
Yeah.
And his ideas and the church's plans and ideas. And you might as well just do that, because that's certainly God's will and God's plan for you to be in line or under the authority.
Right.
I was looking at, you know, you remember the umbrella things from the Bill Gothard thing?
Yep.
The top.
Can I just say something about that before you go? Because, like, I remember that in the Baptist denomination. And the more I listen to things about Shiny Happy People and Bill Gothard and things like that, they talk about how, you know, he may have started that whole umbrella theology, whatever, but a lot of churches and a lot of denominations adopted it. So anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So the very top umbrella is Jesus, and he's the covering, and these other umbrellas underneath it would be the dad, then the mom, then the children, and the pastor's in there somewhere. You know, he can always be inserted wherever he needs to have authority. But anyway, on the top umbrella that says Jesus, under the other umbrellas, it has responsibilities underneath it, like children, you know, obey your parents. Under parents, you know, like father, provide for your children, you know, and so on. But Jesus, under his umbrella, has no responsibilities. Has nothing listed. What's he going to do?
Right.
And so, you know, you have church members, you know, kind of blindly saying, just follow Jesus, just trust Jesus. And because he's this covering, but he doesn't have any responsibility. And so then, well, did he do it right? Did he really protect me? Did he, you know, I don't really notice that. And so then it gets it's the same thing. It gets put back on, well, the church. It does it through the church. It does it through my pastor. That's how he speaks to me. So when I can't hear it anywhere else, that's where I go.
I just feel like religion does a lot of damage control. Like when people come to them with questions like, well, what's Jesus's responsibility? Somehow we like get into our holy huddles and come up with a new narrative. Well, it's because, so like they can justify away any question, but it's not really an answer. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, it basically is gaslighting because it's like, well, we just have to trust and you have to have enough faith and maybe you don't have enough faith. And so I feel like it's just always damage control with the church.
When it's that vague, it keeps you coming back going, maybe I'll find out that, maybe God will speak to me this week. And that's kind of a learned helplessness or a codependency, however you want to describe that.
Yeah.
But one thing that I was really proud of in that section was the one called Cultivated Ignorance. Mm. And that really was a big struggle for me to talk about racism and LGBTQ issues because for these last 6-7 years, I've realized how much I didn't know, how ignorant I was about things.
How privileged we have been.
But also, I talk about my journey going from a person who, when I was a junior in high school, wore blackface in a play.
Yeah.
And just thought it was normal.
Well, and the adults in that situation must have been okay with it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let you do it.
Yeah, the person directing the play suggested it. Let's change this character to, and
not cool.
It was not cool, but it was so much part of. We had a black section of town that was called N Town,
brother,
and
oh my,
so it was just where we were, and I worked at a grocery store, and I was inviting my black friends to come watch this play, and they're looking at me like, no, I don't think so, and I'm like,
and not understanding why they wouldn't want to come,
and you still just don't get it, and for many years I told people, I did that, and they would, and I could be the guy that said, I've always had black friends, because I have. In second grade, had a really good black friend named Steve Davis in college. Mm-hmm. I mean, in high school, I worked with people that were good friends that were black. In college, one of my best friends was black. But we never talked about the things that really mattered.
That's what I was going to say. It's like, we can say we have friends that are black and we have queer friends, but unless we're going to talk about the really important issues, like, it's kind of just a surface level thing. And I mean, you were young, so a lot of times young people don't get in. I would say young people back in our youth didn't talk much about stuff like that. I remember when we were getting ready to move to Texas, and my mom had the conversation with us, like, now you're gonna see people being prejudiced, and they're gonna use a word for black people. I don't know if she ever said the word or not, but I remember her saying, like, you are gonna treat everyone the same. Like, that's not what we believe. But that's as far as it went. And I mean, part of that you can understand because we were children. However, if you're going to evolve, spiritually, I think you need to just evolve in so many other areas of your life. And, if you're going to deconstruct religion, because part of that is systemic racism and, the hate towards the LGBTQ plus community. Like, you have to deconstruct that too. And so I think that's really good that you investigate that and talk about that and talk about how, you have been ignorant. And I think that's one thing when you're a child, but as an adult, I think we really need to wrestle with those things and go, I'm just not gonna stick my head in the sand anymore.
Yeah. And the next chapter is called Parenting, which is odd because our children, in that cultivated ignorance part with LGBTQ and racial issues, our children have probably led us towards better answers and better understanding of those things. And then the parenting section was part of what we did for the Deconstructing Parenthood book, where we get the right title for that. Parenting Deconstructed. Yep. It's part of that writing. At the time we wrote this, we didn't know whether that book was going to be published or not, and so we took some of that from that book and talked about it, because people always want to talk about parenting, and those are kind of the nuggets from parenting that we just included in this. Finally, to the third section, and all of that wrestling with beliefs, I hope helps people, know that all of us are wrestling with similar things, and we're trying to sort it out.
Let me ask you a question before we go on to the next thing. So when you talk about wrestling with beliefs or ideals or whatever, do you ever see yourself like, boom, I'm planting my flag here, I'm kind of done, like, or do you see yourself continuing to learn and grow? And what do you think?
Well, I hope I never plant my flag, and by that I mean writing a creed, writing a belief statement, forming a denomination, forming a church. That's why I'm hesitant. It's one of the reasons I'm hesitant to go back to church. Is because I had a chance to preach, for the Methodist Church. Is that right? For a couple small churches around here.
That's right.
But I knew when I did that, I would have to go and assent to their belief statement.
Right.
And then I would be controlled by the board and the bishop or whatever in that church. I don't think I ever want to be there again. I want number one, I don't want to talk about theology all the time or argue about it. And number two, I don't want to be confined to a specific belief statement. I want to keep that open as I keep going forward.
Leaning forward, right.
But I do think it's appropriate, at least personally, to wrestle with it. Sure. And say, am I sure I want to give this up? Or why exactly am I giving this up? Or why is it changing? And when I write about those things and wrestle with it, then it becomes more clear.
And I think that if I'm not of a particular race, gender, whatever, there's always something I can learn from that race or gender. Like, I'm not black. I'm never going to know what it's like to be a black person in the United States. And so I never want to say, like, I'm going to plant my flag here and this is everything I need to know about being a black person in the United States, or a queer person in the United States.
I get it now.
Or a disabled person in the United States. Though those aren't part of, who I am. And so my job, I feel, is to continue to learn and not act like I've arrived. So. Yeah.
And what we tend to do is we learn a little bit and then we go, okay, I get it. Now I can explain it to everybody. And now everybody should think like me. But it doesn't work long term.
Right. So okay, now go on to part 3.
Part 3 is called Healing from Trauma. And we really went into a lot of detail there about being and becoming, going inside, trusting ourselves,
Right.
doing the hard work of darkness and shadow.
Through
Again,
focusing.
yeah, through focusing, and we talked about the focusing method that was in part developed by Dr. Paul Fitzgerald, our friend, and I'm going to talk to him here in a minute. But we went through all of that, and even my kind of thing at the end was about dying and funerals and how I want my funeral to be done. Just a different take on all of that. So that part 3 is really important, and I think lots of people are looking for a way to address their trauma.
Yeah.
And so on. So we finally got some of that stuff written down, where people can journey along with us and experiment on their own and things like that.
Right.
It's important. I think too many of us that have been in ministry, I say, well, we couldn't just sit on the porch, and there's something in us that wants to share with others and help others and things like that. And that's part of why you get into ministry, because you want to love people and help them and so on. So, but there's a lot of people in the desert that, like I said before, are wounded because of trauma. As our friend Janine says, trauma in the pews,
Yeah.
There's...
Amazing book, by the way.
Yeah.
Trauma in the Pews by Janine McConaughey. Check it out.
Check it out. And we will... There's stuff on our wall right now about that and so on, but she's got a new book coming out pretty soon.
It's kind of a
version 2.
Version 2,
yeah,
like
it's a little
2.0.
little bit like our book here that kind of follows up on, and hers will be more about practices and so on. Anyway,
yeah,
you'll hear more about
be
that
good, though.
in the
Really
future.
Good.
But doing the hard work, learning to go inside. I hope this is helpful. That section is real helpful to people. I hope they don't get hung up in the wrestling with beliefs section because they disagree with us a little bit, and not get to part 3, because that is where we talk about some actual ways to heal and ways to approach that.
And the part 2, I mean, I like how you titled the whole section, Wrestling with Beliefs. Like, we're not... Again, we haven't stuck our flag in any one place. Like, some of these things we still wrestle with, and this is where we are today. But 5 years down the road, we don't know. Yeah. I mean, and like, we're okay with that. Like, that doesn't scare us anymore. Not knowing, it's like these are things we'll probably continue to wrestle with, and wrestling's not necessarily a bad thing.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be bloody. Sometimes it is, but...
And so the last part is called Dealing with Religion. And we pull from out into the desert, it kind of in like a summary mode for those first parts to kind of summarize what we said in Out in the Desert. Just in case people don't have both books, if they just have this one, they'll get some of that, at least in summary form. But then we kind of went into some simple practices, and the last chapter is called Evolving Beyond Christianity. So this is the way you should do it, but here's a proposal. How can we evolve forward and keep going with or without Christianity? So that's the book.
Yeah.
Right? It's like 230 something pages.
Yeah.
It should be an easy read. We don't really write on it's not like a scholarly read.
Right.
Even though I think there's some wisdom in it. And is that right? 238 pages. 238. Yeah.
But I agree with you. It's not a difficult read at all. And like you said, it's kind of broken up into not only sections, but like subsections within the section. So it's kind of like you can
bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, so you can just take a chunk of it and read it and then process that and see where you land with it.
Yeah. I'm very proud of the book and proud of both of our work that went into it, and looking forward to the future, the conversations we'll have. We do have, with this book, Leaning Forward, we have a study guide already ready for it. Someone is also contributing to a study guide for Out in the Desert. And when they get done with that book, we may have it. But we want to give the study guides away, at least for now.
Yeah.
And if someone purchases the new book, then we can send them on PDF
of the study guide.
A study guide that's already kind of laid out in book form, and would be something that you could work through this book with the study guide, and maybe that'd be more meaningful for you.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There we are. The book's called what?
Leaning Forward, Finding Peace Beyond the Confines of Religion.
There you go.
Yes. There you go.
There you go.
That's been good. This has been a good conversation.
Yeah.
You know? And hopefully, people pick up the book, and
we're getting some good responses from the first, the people reviewing it now. We didn't do any internal endorsements.
Right.
I'm just, maybe it's just a personal thing for me right now that I'm just a little dismayed at, this, I'll endorse yours if you'll endorse mine. That doesn't seem authentic to me. And I've seen too many of those games kind of being played. And we just didn't go for the, there's a tendency to go for the big name. Can I get an endorsement from the big name?
Right.
But what I've done so far mainly is just talk to my friends and say, would you read this? And honestly tell me what you think. And just give a quick review. And let's do it that way. So we're using that more for advertising, and promoting the book.
Right.
Just with quote-unquote normal people. Anyway, it's going. And then the reviews are pretty good, so far.
Yep.
People saying this is worth reading.
Yep.
And you should read. So anyway, that's all I have.
Okay.
How about you? Anything else?
I don't have anything else.
All right. We appreciate each and every one of you that tune in and listen. We invite you to give your feedback, pose a question, start some discussion in the Desert Sanctuary, whatever seems right to you. But as always, we invite you to be where you are, to be who you are, and to be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.